Good morning. Good morning. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us at the first annual Future of Medicine Boston Globe event. My name is Anna Kuchment. I'm the Boston Globe's health and medical editor. I'm so pleased to kick off this day of conversations focused on innovation and advancing healthcare with a truly impressive lineup of speakers and participation from leading companies and health systems that are driving us forward. Thank you so much for participating, both to our audience here in person in Boston and our virtual audience tuning in online. To begin our program, I'm excited to introduce Regina Barzilay. Dr. Barzilay is a School of Engineering Distinguished Professor of AI and Health in the Department of Computer Science at MIT. She develops machine learning methods for drug discovery and early cancer detection. In the past, she worked on natural language processing. Her research has been recognized with a MacArthur Genius Grant, as well as the Squirrel AI Award for Artificial Intelligence for the Benefit of Humanity, a $1 million award rivaled only by the Nobel Prize and Turing Award in their level of associated funding. She is a member of the National Academy of Engineering, National Academy of Medicine, and American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Thank you so much, Dr. Barzilay, for joining us.
Thank you.
I wanted to start by asking you to tell the story of how you became involved in using AI for early cancer screening.
So I did my PhD and I worked as a junior professor at MIT in machine learning for natural language processing. It was the early days before ChatGPT, but it was an exciting area. And then in 2014, when I was 43 years old, I was diagnosed with breast cancer, and I was treated at MGH. And one of the biggest surprises, besides being diagnosed, was the fact how technologically not advanced was cancer treatment at MGH. And then I realized that it's not only MGH, but it's a national problem, because all these amazing technologies that we're using in all other areas of our life, they are not really part of cancer treatment, neither in diagnosis or treatment selection or follow-up. So after I finished, my treatment and I came back to MIT, I became clear that I have to change it, and I'm trying to do it until today.
And so talk about the AI that you developed. I understand that it is more sensitive than the human eye, and it's able to detect cancer up to 5 years earlier than a traditional mammogram.
Yeah, so for those of you who are maybe less familiar with how breast cancer today, how do you know who is at risk? So we know that 15% of diagnosed breast cancer have genetic history, like BRCA mutation, and those people know, or if you have, cancer in your family, again, you're screened differently, people know that you are high risk. However, the vast majority of us, patients like myself, who never had, I didn't have any cancer in my family. I don't have any kind of known associated risk factor. When these patients are diagnosed, it's really a surprise. And, and I was lucky enough that, my doctor insisted that I start going and doing my mammograms, but, it's not always the case. Sometimes people are getting busy or they forget. And the diagnosis is delayed, especially if you don't think that you're going to be one out of 8 women who are going to get breast cancer. And another point to make is that the standard models that are trying to predict who it is, you get breast density, correct? I'm sure there are ladies in this room who went to recently and did their mammogram, so not so recently, and you get these letters that say if you have high density, you are in increased risk. But the truth is that over half of women have high density. I remember when I was first time doing my mammogram, they said, we are going to give you this letter, but it actually doesn't mean anything because half of the MIT population has high density. So what I wanted to do is to be able to look at the image, to make machine look at the image and predict what are the patterns that correlate with a future cancer. Because cancer is not a cold, it doesn't develop within a few days. It's a very long process, and there are a lot of changes in the tissues that need to happen to actually enable cancer growth. And the idea was that you can take lots of images, and this is joint joint research with MGH. We took a lot of images of women for whom we know what were their outcomes for 5 years. And then machine can learn how to associate these very low-level features in the image with a future risk. The same way as your iPhone recognizes your face, you know, you don't really know why. Even if you have a bad hair day, it still recognizes you. But the same way, the idea is that you're training the machine to identify these patterns. And it turns out that it works actually pretty well.
And is it true, well, how much earlier is it able to find signs of cancer than a traditional mammogram?
So again, there is like increased risk, because whenever you're looking at the future, you know, things may change in various directions. But I would share an example which relates to me. So after we start doing this research, I actually look back at my mammograms, because I was diagnosed on the 3rd mammogram. And what I discovered on my own case, that the machine was seeing cancer. Actually, you can see it, but it's hard to really, for human eye, but you can really see it on the 1st mammogram. It becomes a bit bigger on the 2nd, and then it becomes even bigger on the 3rd. So for many patients, it can be really a year's early identification that they are high risk, and it doesn't mean that you may have it. There are different ways how you can prevent it. There are chemo prevention. There are lots of things that you can do. It doesn't mean that you are destined to have it, but knowing that you are high risk can provide you better screening, can give you access to genetic testing, to chemo prevention, and a variety of other things.
And in what stage of development is this technology?
So one of the funny parts of this AI technology that machine can tell you at which part of the image it looks at. It can. But the problem is that humans cannot really validate it, because if you go to your doctor and show you image and ask them, am I going to get breast cancer in 3 years, they cannot answer this question. Even if you highlight them, some part, they still cannot understand it. So that's why it was really important for us to test it on a very, very big population, because the only confidence that we had that it actually continues to deliver the same accuracy on many patients. And at this point, we tested this model. It's called Mirai, which is future in Japanese. This model is tested on 1.7 million women worldwide in many hospitals in the United States, in Latin America, in Asia, in Israel. So all over the space, we see very similar results. And we also made the model open source so that anybody can take it, test it, and report what they find, which I think is really important for validation and giving more confidence to the doctors that it actually works.
If you had to estimate, how soon it might be widely used in the clinic, what would you say?
So this is a very interesting question, and I think it's very timely to ask it, because as you hear about all the wonders of AI, which cover all the areas, of clinical care, and you're thinking about your very last visit to your provider, you can think, okay, I am reading in Boston Globe, New York Times, all these great things, so why I don't see it when I go to the doctor? And you don't need to vote, but if I would ask here, who've seen AI when they went to MGH, to Mount Auburn, to any of the hospitals, the answer most likely will be none. And this is actually very consistent with a recent study that was published by New England Journal of Medicine AI that looked at how much AI codes, get reimbursed. So they took the 16 billion codes of American insurers from 2018 to 2023 and asked what is a portion of this code that come from 500 FDA-approved tools. So what they found out that from this 500 tool, only, I think, 10 had the codes, and the most frequently used tool, which was something for cardiology, had just 67,000 billings. 67,000 out of 16 billion. So all the AI tool billings in 5 years was less than 100K. So what I'm kind of trying to say, it's really not there. It's not only this tool, but many others. They're still not part of our clinical infrastructure. And, and I think it will take more than AI. It would really take a collective solution to ensure that these tools are translated, not on the experimental basis. There are hospitals that are using it here and there in different countries, but we really want to make a solution where this technology is routinely used in healthcare.
And let's talk about what else you're working on. I know you're also working on lung cancer, early detection of lung cancer. So can you talk a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, so lung cancer is actually an interesting in a way that, for breast cancer, women are screened. So let's say even if you don't use this technology, you're used year after year, and that enables early detection. But with lung cancer, the criteria that we're using today, which is heavily focuses on smokers, actually doesn't even look at the patients who never smoke or smoke very little, and they are not screened. And for very many patients, they are, diagnosed at the point that their treatment is very challenging or their prospects of survival are not very high. And the question that Lisha Sequest, who is an oncologist at MGH, and Florian Filterman, who is a radiologist, they ask, can we look at the CT scan and predict what is the likelihood of a patient developing lung cancer? And maybe you don't know, but lots of people are diagnosed with lung cancer when they just were scanned for something else. They accidentally were discovered. And this is a good case because then somebody can intervene and change the outcome. So this particular model actually enables very accurately predict the likelihood of a patient developing lung cancer. And we did this discovery very recently that we looked, there is a very big cohort of patients that come from 33 academic hospitals across United States. It's called NLST. And the question that I asked was, how anecdotal was my own story? As you remember, I told you that my cancer was delayed by diagnosis by 2 years. So I was really curious to see across the country, this is a very high quality data, how many lung cancer patients that were on trial, that were already very carefully checked, how many of them are delayed in diagnosis. And what we found out that 1/3 of the patient had lung cancer 2 years prior to diagnosis when they were already screened. So it really tells us that, what we call risk assessment, it's not really risk, it's really identifying what is already there for very many patients.
So it's a more personalized way to determine risk and screen.
First of all, to determine risk and to identify, identify these patients who really need to be very carefully monitored. And if they already are destined to get lung cancer or breast cancer, they can be treated as soon as possible. And another thing, if I may add, like the breast cancer is easy in the following way, that there are chemopreventative tools that if you are really in high risk, you can take these drugs and it's shown that they can by 50% decrease your likelihood of developing breast cancer. Of course, they have side effects and we cannot give it to the whole population. But for lung cancer, this kind of chemopreventative drugs don't even exist. And one of the reasons is that frequency of lung cancer in the population is relatively low, so you cannot run these big clinical trials. So the hope is that when we have these tools that can tell us this is really a high-risk population, we can run clinical trials and develop tools for those patients.
That's great. Maybe you could just talk a little bit more about the promise of this technology. If and when it does come to fruition, how will cancer detection and treatment change?
So we already, again, we are using it in several centers. So talking about the local story in Boston, for those of you who were in Boston and treated at MGH during pandemic, if you remember those dark times, the governor decided to cut non-essential services in the hospitals in the state, and women couldn't go and do their mammograms unless they are high risk. But who knows who are the high risk? So what MGH did, they used Mirai to identify patients based on their prior mammograms who are really at risk and call them first. And what they demonstrated in the study that they published, that actually using a very small subset of women who came, the number of cancers they discovered were almost the same as when they did the full screening. So this is just one of the local examples of how we are already using it, and there is an ongoing trial, again, locally in UMass Worcester, where women who identify as high risk immediately screened by MRI because it's a high-resolution modality, again, to make it sooner. But the way I'm thinking, if we kind of go from this example and start imagining where this technology can bring us, And I'm not only thinking about imaging, like now we are starting work with blood and other modalities. When we are thinking about cancer, it's always catch-up game, you know. Many patients are diagnosed when it's already big and require serious treatment, or patients which have advanced cancer who are on the treatment, you know, their cancer mutates, and oftentimes when they discover that it mutates, there is, you know, not many choices. The way I see this technology is really for us with AI to be in front of the disease, you know, kind of predict how likely, you know, the tumor will change, the environment of the tumor is going to change, and ahead of time to find the treatment and really personalize it for the patient. So be much more specific, be predictive, and hopefully both improve the survival rate and also make the treatments not as grueling as they are today.
Great. And I know that now you're also focused on drug discovery using machine learning to develop new drugs. What diseases, you know, are you looking at?
So drug discovery is an area which, you know, I sort of really randomly got into. And it's a really much a Cambridge/Boston story. After I finished my own cancer treatment, I kind of was not sure what I want to do with my life. And somebody proposed, like I was thinking, what do I want to do? I knew that I want to do something with cancer, but I really knew very little. And somebody asked me to help them with a proposal for DARPA on, you know, modeling molecules, like modeling how molecules interact with each other, you know, what are the properties of the molecules. I said, okay. We started working, and then looking from a window from the data center at MIT, you know, at some point I realized, wow, there are so many pharmaceutical companies, you know, maybe this technology is useful. And we actually brought in multiple of these pharmaceutical companies that I can see from a window, and we started seeing how this technology can help in discovery, because discovery, it's a bit kind of like looking for, you know, what do they say, a needle in the haystack? You know, there is this molecule or something with this property and a lot of guess. And, and the hope of machine learning is that you can do a lot of the analysis totally in silico, that you don't need to go in the lab. You can imagine what are the properties of molecules, how they interact with the system. And we so far applied it both to cancer and to antibiotics, because this is an area where pharma is not super interested. It's not financially, you know, kind of exciting area for them, but we've demonstrated that with machine learning we can today discover antibiotics that are more effective and can work against strains of bugs for which we don't have cure today.
We're getting some questions, and I wanted to read out a question from our listeners. What's the sensitivity of the pipeline for breast and lung cancer detection? How much data is being used to train each of the tools?
Yeah, so thank you. I was just giving a talk in the morning, so I remember the numbers. For breast cancer, we used data from 80,000 patients from MGH. And as I said, we tested it on 1.7 million. For lung cancer, the original data set was around 15,000 patients with an outcomes for up to 6 years. Now, I wouldn't remember the sensitivity, but I can give you, like, for instance, the AUC, which is area under the curve. For 5-year detection for breast is 77. But if you're predicting like in 2 years, is around 87. For lung, because CT is high resolution modality, your detection rate for the 2 years is 92, and it's 79, I think, for 5 years. So it's pretty reasonable. And again, the hope is that you identify this population and you apply other screening modality just for the small subset of patients who need it.
Great. So you mentioned that AI tools are not being taken up, you know, as rapidly as we might want in medical care. So what are the main impediments, and what should be done to, you know, to make them more widely used?
So actually in this article, and if you're interested, I encourage you to read it. It was written by Stanford professor Jim Zhu. they looked at why there is such a low intake of AI tools across, multiple, all the areas actually of clinical care. They identify several reasons. One of them is a reimbursement. What they claim in the article that today when the doctor uses AI tool, it actually decreases the reimbursement that they can get from the insurance. So, and I participated in a discussion in the House of Representatives, the right parts of the government are aware that the financial system doesn't provide sufficient incentive to bring this technology. This is problem number one. Problem number two, if you're looking at the guidelines across all the areas, if you're looking at US PSTF, which is a preventative task force, if you're looking to NCCN, which provides, guidelines which then decide how insurance pay for services for cancer, for instance, none of them really use any diagnostics with AI. So bringing this technology and making, not even like MRI is free, but let's say now you need to pay for MRI, unless it's part of the guidelines, insurance would not pay for it. So you need to bring insurance in. And the final piece is really, I think some things that I don't want to put it in clinicians' court because they have so much to deal with, but I think part of it is really designing safe pipelines when people can use AI tools in a way which is safe and secure for patients. And majority of the doctors, remember, they didn't study AI in their medical school, so for many of them it's a bit of an enigma, but we need kind of to break this status quo and start finding better way to integrate it in patient care.
Do you see any limitations or shortcomings to AI? Do you expect, could it one day replace radiologists? Are we always going to need radiologists? Is there any downside to using these tools?
So in the current state, I don't quite see replacement of the radiologist. But if you're thinking to your last time when you visited, let's say your general provider, and today the general provider needs to write the notes and look and read, and the time, the face time that they actually spent with you and really care for you is very limited because they need to do a lot of those tasks. So the way I can see that it will free the doctors to do what they, I believe, like to do, which is really being with their patient and providing care, and at the same time providing more safety tools to ensure that, it is, for instance, for radiology, it's quite known that if images are read in the evening, the accuracy drops because, we all get tired. So having machines that can help, I think that's where I see this technology moving, and I don't think that they're going to be replacing anybody, not in the near future and maybe not in the very far future.
Dr. Barzilay, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to our audience. We have a full day of panels ahead about the future of Alzheimer's disease, organ transplantation, vaccinations, and a lot more, so I hope that you'll stay with us. Thank you.
Thank you.